Week 8 of the fantasy football season. His running back starts hits every matchup this week. Thursday night, Minnesota Vikings at the Los Angeles Rams. Aaron Jones, he's been a top 10 running back easily this season. He's fit this offense well for this Minnesota's Viking team. They're 5-1 on the year, and also on a one-year prove-it deal. He wants to get a new contract, obviously, after the season, so he took the one-year deal. He's made the most out of it, and this week a good matchup at the Rams. I think he goes out there once again and puts up a solid performance. Kyren Williams a start each and every week, once again finding the end zone last week for this Los Angeles Ram team. And now to get Cooper Kupp back in the offense in this ball game, the box is going to open up even more. I know it's a tough matchup versus the Vikings, but every week, Kyren Williams is start. Green Bay Packers at the Jaguars. Josh Jacobs, he's been a pretty steady back all season long. Last week he found the end zone, had a nice ball game for this Packer team, and this week versus Jacksonville defense that can't stop anyone, he's a start. Travis Etienne, Tank Bigsby, we'll see if Etienne returns off the hamstring injury in this one, and they're both flex options. Obviously this Packer defense, they're good this season. I know Joe Mixon last week went out there and had a big game on the ground, but we don't know what the work share is going to be with Travis Etienne if he returns, and Bigsby. And I know last week Bigsby went over 100 yards on the ground and found the end zone twice, but this week if Etienne's back in the mix, he's not going to get over 20 touches, so he's a flex option. Arizona Cardinals at the Miami Dolphins. James Conner, he's locked in weekly as a start. Good matchup this week at the Miami Dolphins. Conner, he's locked in as a starter, one of the better running backs all season long and consistent running backs. And last week in a tougher matchup versus the Chargers on Monday night, he went for 19 for 101 and 2 catches, 51 yards. He's a vocal point in the offense. I arguably could say he's the number one option in the offense behind Kyler Murray, where Marvin Harrison really hasn't done much all season. Trey McBride, he's been good, but not putting up the elite numbers like he did last season. And obviously Michael Wilson, he hasn't done much this season. So Conner coming off a tough matchup where he still went out there and over 100 yards in that ball game on the ground. I think once again this week in a good matchup versus a mid to poor Miami defense, he's a must-start. Devon Achane, he's a start. Last week, Achane finally double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues. And now with Tua back in the lineup, this whole offense is going to pick it up and get going. So we know this Cardinal defense doesn't travel well. And I think Achane, as long as Tua's in the lineup, he could be a top 10 option. Once again, Raheem Mostert is a flex option. Last week, we saw some good runs out of Raheem Mostert. He looked healthy. And we know last season he scored 21 touchdowns. Is Mostert. So him and Devon Achane, a nice 1-2 punch. But Mostert's upside obviously isn't the upside of Achane. He's a flex. Jets at the Patriots. Breece Hall, the last couple weeks, he's really bounced back after he was hitting a dry spell for a little bit. So this week in a great matchup at the Patriots. Breece Hall, it wouldn't be surprising to me if he's a top 5 back. He's a start. Stevenson and Antonio Gibson are sits for me. Just inconsistency in this backfield. And we even saw Joe Michael Hasty mixed in last week and go out there and have a nice ball game for this New England Patriot team. So this week, both these running backs with a tough matchup versus the New York Jets, even though I know Najee Harris just went over 100 yards and found the end zone, but there still sits for me in this one with a bad offensive line in terms of running. And with this team most likely trailing early and often, Baltimore Ravens at the Cleveland Browns. Derrick Henry a start for me. We know he's the best running back in fantasy football by a mile this season, coming off another over 180 yards total and found the end zone in last week. And this week in a good matchup at the Browns, he's a must-start. Nick Chubb will flex. I know last week Nick Chubb had double-digit fantasy points, but obviously that goal line touchdown saved his day for Nick Chubb, where at the time, 5 carries, 5 yards at the time, and then he had that goal line stamper. So Nick Chubb, he's a great talent, no doubt about it. But this team obviously going nowhere, and teams are going to load the box now with Watson out for the season, even though he wasn't doing much anyway. But Nick Chubb, not 100%, because they're easing him in. He's a flex option. Devonta Foreman, strong, they're going to mix in at times in this ball game, but obviously not going to have any fantasy value, especially in a matchup versus Raven team. Philadelphia Eagles at the Bengals. Saquon Barkley, he's a top 5 back this season easily in fantasy football, coming off over 175 and a touchdown on the ground versus former team. And this week, a good matchup versus a Bengal defense. He's a must-start. Chase Brown, a flex option. It was a down game for him last week, but Zach Moss really didn't do much or see the field much. So Chase Brown in a beatable matchup where we know he's a good receiving back out of the backfield as well. He's a flex option. Zach Moss, a sit. Like I said, the workload went down a lot last week, and that fumble issue really got him in the doghouse here for Zach Moss over the last couple weeks, so you can't trust him with a full slate of games. This week, he's a sit. Indianapolis Colts at the Texans, pretty straightforward. Jonathan Taylor, if he returns in this game, he's obviously a must-start. He was a top 10 pick in most fantasy drafts, and he's a solid running back. Just injuries have been a problem for Taylor the last 2 seasons and the contract issue last year as well. Trey Sermon, Tyler Goodson, not that impressive. I know Goodson had some flashes, but Sermon the last 2 weeks really hasn't done much. If Taylor's out, these guys are still sits for me. The 50-50 split in a mediocre backfield. Joe Mixon, he's a must-start. What a great landing spot it was for him this offseason to go with the Houston Texans in a deal. And he's been playing great football in the ball games he's played. I know he missed some time with the ankle injury earlier this season, but he looks healthy as Mixon. And going back to week 1, he torched this Indianapolis Colts team for over 130 yards on the ground. Tennessee Titans at the Lions. Tony Pollard, he's been a great back this season and the only viable fantasy option in this backfield. He's a start. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, the best 1-2 combo in the backfield. Then Jahmyr Gibbs finally had the coming out party last week where he went for a monster performance as Jahmyr Gibbs. Over 150 total yards from scrimmage and found the end zone. So Jahmyr Gibbs, explosive running back, home run ability we saw last week. And David Montgomery, an all-round back, and the goal line backs. Even in a tougher matchup, they're both starts. Atlanta Falcons at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Bijan Robinson the last 2 weeks, he showed the upside. He showed why he's one of the better running backs in the league. And he showed obviously as well why he got drafted in the first round of every fantasy draft early. So he's a start in a good matchup at the Bucs that just got torched by Derrick Henry for 169 on the ground, even though who doesn't Derrick Henry go out there and torch? Now to the Bucs. Rashad White, Bucky Irvin both found the end zone last week. Pretty much a 50-50 split between these 2 running backs. I know it was garbage time when they both found the end zone, but they've been a good 1-2 combo over the last few weeks. Obviously in week 6 where White missed the game at the New Orleans Saints, but him and Irvin, they've been solid and they're both flex options. Sean Tucker had obviously 192 scrimmage yards, 2 touchdowns, the New Orleans Saints a couple weeks ago, but he rarely saw the field in this one, and it's White and Irvin's backfield right now. New Orleans Saints at the Chargers. Alvin Kamara, he's locked in as a start each and every week for this New Orleans Saints team. Pretty decent matchup at the Chargers. Just gave up 101 yards on the ground to Connor. J.K. Dobbins, he's a start. I know last week it wasn't a great game at all for J.K. Dobbins, where it was more of a passing game where Herbert actually went over 300 yards in that ball game. But J.K. Dobbins, he's been a solid running back. And in the last game, it doesn't look like anyone was really a threat to his touches and Vidal in the backfield. Buffalo Bills at the Seahawks. Both these running backs are locked in weekly as starts. James Cook came back last week. A lot of yards on the ground, but he found the end zone. And that game was out of hand anyway versus the Tennessee Titans. 34-10. Victory easily, even though I know the Bills were trailing early. Kenneth Walker start each and every week. He could do it all. He's a great 3-down back. Catch the football out of the backfield. Running between the tackles. Home run ability. And this week, I know it's a tougher matchup versus the Bills, but he's still a start. DeAndre Swift and the Bears traveled to the Commanders. DeAndre Swift to start. The last 3 weeks before the bye week, Swift had 15 or more fantasy points in PPR leagues. So Swift, he could catch the football out of the backfield. He's obviously good in between the tackles, even though he's a little bit of a smaller back. But we saw last season he handled himself well in Philadelphia. Now the last 3 weeks, he's turned it around for the Bears and fantasy owners who own them. So he's a start. Brian Robinson, a start each and every week. Top 10 running back, monster at the goal line, where if they're within the 2-yard line and hand them the football, pencil them in for a touchdown. So this week in a matchup versus the Bears, where their run defense has been middle of the pack this season, he's a start. Austin Eckler, a sit. Last couple weeks, Eckler's numbers have dropped off a little bit, even though still on the season, he's had double-digit fantasy games in all the games he's played, besides one, which was last week versus the Panthers, where he only had 4. But Brian Robinson, he's the guy in the backfield for this Commander team. And Austin Eckler, like I said, if he's not catching 4 or 5 balls weekly, he's not really going to get the numbers. He's a sick. Kansas City Chiefs at the Vegas Raiders. Kareem Hunt, he's taken over this backfield. Ryan really hasn't touched the football. Carson Steele in the last game. And we saw Kareem Hunt in a tough matchup at the Niners. He found the end zone twice, another nice game. And now to the Raiders, Madison, he's taken over the starting job, no doubt about it. Zamir White's been out over the last few weeks. And Madison, he looked good last week, going over double-digit fantasy points in that ball game versus the Los Angeles Rams. But this week versus one of the best defenses in the league, where I believe Madison will be bottled up, and we didn't even see Jordan Mason do much versus Chief defense. He's a sick. Carolina Panthers at the Broncos, Chuba Hubbard to start. But the only thing with Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks, his practice window's open. He's an elite running back coming out of college. We're coming off the ACL, did Brooks in, obviously missing all this time early in the season. But Chuba Hubbard, he's been great, no doubt about it. But the only thing, the numbers have dropped off, and Brooks is looming. And this is a tough matchup with the Broncos, but you got to stick with Hubbard in this one. Javonte Williams to start. Last week, a big ball game, 26 points in PPR leagues for Javonte Williams. And this week versus a weak Carolina defense, ground and pound, I think once again, it's going to be for this Bronco team. So he's a start. Jaleel McLaughlin, he really hasn't shown much all season long. No confidence. Every team on the slate this week, he's an easy sit. Dallas Cowboys at the Niners Sunday night. Rico Dowdle, he's been pretty solid for this Cowboy team. 3 games with double-digit fantasy points in the last 4 weeks. So Ezekiel Elliott, he's been phased out. He hasn't done much. His best days are behind him. And Rico Dowdle can catch the football out of the backfield as well. But this is going to be a tough ball game in San Francisco, even with all their injuries, obviously, in the lineup. Deebo Samuel most likely out. Ayuk out for the season. Kittle banged up with the foot. I still believe this defense goes out there and shuts this running game of the Dallas Cowboys. And their trap's going to be make Dak Prescott throw the football, because they've had major success versus Dak over the last few seasons. Jordan Mason, he's a start each and every week until CMC returns. And we know McCaffrey's possibly returning week 10. Could be a target date after the bye week for the Niners. So Mason, he's a good running back filling in. I know numbers have dropped off for him, but also the shoulder injury hasn't helped as well. But this week versus a weak Cowboy defense who's banged up, he's a start. And the final game of the week, Sunday night, the Giants at the Steelers. Tyrone Tracy, Devin Singletary sits for me. Last week, both these guys got opportunities, didn't do much. And I know the game was out of hand early, and Daniel Jones was a crash test dummy in that one, getting sacked. It seemed like almost every play in that game. But like I said, this run defense is good. I know Breece Hall did them in last week with a big performance, but most of it was in the receiving game. And Tracy and Singletary, I don't believe we're going to do much in this one, especially if Drew Lock is starting. And they're going to take the run out of this one is the Steelers defense. And out to the Steelers, Harris start each and every week now. Last 2 games over 100 yards finding the end zone. And he's really getting things going is Najee Harris. And Jalen Warren is a sit. I know last week was one of his better games of the season for Warren. But when Najee Harris getting big workloads and being the viable fantasy option, with Warren mixing in as that speedster and catching downs back, I don't see him really having value sets. Running back start sits every matchup for week 8 of the fantasy football season.